Hi everyone, Michael P. Spradlin back with chapter 14 of Into the Killing Seas. I want to thank all of you who have participated so far. I hope you're enjoying this. And as I said on my Facebook page, I'm getting towards the end of this novel. So if you have a request for the next book that I start to read along, please leave me a comment and let me know what you'd like to hear. I will keep doing this as long as this lasts, and I hope that educators and librarians and parents can use these videos, as well. So what I'm going to do is jump right in, but not before I say a special thank you to all the teachers and educators who are out there engaging with kids, keeping their process going, and a special shout out and thank you to all of the first responders and healthcare workers who are putting their lives at risk every single day to help us get through this. You are beyond heroic, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. So let's remember, clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. All right. So let's read chapter 14, and it's titled But a Dream. I didn't want to lose myself like the poor man who had just gave up and sunk below the water. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. I tried, but it was hot and I was thirsty and tired. Soon my mind was playing tricks on me. I slept and woke and slept and woke. I couldn't remember if this was the second or third or how many days we'd been in the water. I think we'd passed a whole day, if not more, just baking in the sun on the raft, but I couldn't be sure. None of us had a watch. Teddy was delirious, and Benny spent most of the time groaning in pain and sleeping fitfully. Maybe it was exhaustion or dehydration or hunger, but I started seeing strange things in the water. One time I heard Mom and Dad calling my name behind me, and there they were, headed straight toward the raft in a powerful, sleek motorboat, like the ones we used to watch zip up and down the Detroit River. "Patrick, Teddy," my mom called from the boat. My dad was at the wheel. My mom looked like she was dressed for a picnic in a bright yellow blouse. Dad was wearing a straw hat and a floral print Hawaiian shirt. They looked like they'd just stepped out of an advertisement in a magazine. I was so happy to see them. "Mom," I shouted. "Mom, we're right over here. I did it, Mom. I took care of Teddy, just like you said." "I know you did, sweetheart. I know you did. I'm so proud of you." "Will you come get us?" I shouted back across the water. "We sure will. But I need you to do one more thing first." I groaned. After all this time, I just wanted to get in the boat with my parents, and they were giving me chores. "What, Mom? What do you want me to do?" "Look out for that shark," she yelled. "What? Mom? What?" Yet another shark hammered into the side of the pallet, jolting me out of my stupor. Benny woke up and unleashed a loud stream of curse words. Teddy just wailed and buried his head in his arms. The shark had maneuvered its way right into the V shape of the pallet. It moved quicker than I could, and soon its snapping jaws were inches away from my face. I screamed and swung my nail-top stick at it with all my might and hit it right in the gills. It thrashed its head back and forth, but wasn't giving up the fight. This shark was big, maybe the largest one we'd seen. And with its size and strength and the fuss it was making, it split the raft in two before deciding we weren't worth the trouble and sneaking beneath the water. "Patty boy," Benny called out as a wave spun Teddy and him around. Within seconds, they were drifting away from me. Lightning fast, I swung the nail stick like a hammer. The nail stuck in the wooden surface of their half of the raft. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled them back toward me until I could grab hold. "Quick thinking there, Pipsqueak," Benny said, "but like I told you earlier, you got to take off your belt and Teddy's too and tie us to one another. I don't want to have to bust you for not following orders." I did as he instructed and managed to lash the pallet back together, stopping only once to beat back another shark that attacked us. I did it without even thinking too much this time. I suppose I'm getting used to the beasts, I thought as my stomach rumbled. I was so hungry. And I guess the sharks were too. I couldn't blame them for trying to find a meal. I just wouldn't let them succeed. "Good job, Marine," Benny said as I tied up the second belt in place. "Your ship is secure. By the way, a ship needs a name." "What are we going to call your vessel, Captain? How about the USS Iron Horse?" I shook my head. "The USS Greenberg." "That ain't even funny," Benny said. All night long, the sharks kept coming, only now that I understood them, I made sure that they understood me. They bothered us, but none came close to doing any real damage. Then, just as the sun was about to crest the horizon in the east, they started getting testy. Long ones, short ones, really aggressive ones, all seemed desperate to feed before the rising heat of the day. They reminded me of the Japanese arriving back on Guam, how they just kept coming at us relentlessly. Between holding on to the raft and the violent waves and clubbing, kicking, and screaming at sharks all night, I was completely spent. When the sun rose and the water calmed, I lay there, flat on my back, the jagged wooden planks cutting into my shoulder blades. I didn't think I would ever be able to move again. It was now dawn. The pallet was saturated and sinking. It floated a few inches below the surface. Every cut and scrape on our bodies was swelling, and the salt water made them burn with unending pain. The sun hurt my eyes. Even screwed shut, the harsh light penetrated through my eyelids. Groaning with the effort, I threw my arm across my face to cut the glare and give myself some relief. It was clear to me now that no one was looking for us. The distress call hadn't gone out. We'd only seen a few of the other survivors since that first morning. What if everyone else had been found and rescued, but no one found us? What if they'd left us here to die? The thought made me angry. Angry with the men who might have gotten the help we so desperately needed, with the Navy, who hadn't been able to stop the torpedo or save the Indy, with Benny for helping us get on the ship in the first place, with Teddy for acting the way he did, and most of all with myself for ever thinking that I could find my parents. What a fool I was. I had read newspapers and heard reports of what happened after the Japanese landed in the Philippines. Of course my mom and dad never made it out of there on the next plane. If they had, and the plane made it to safety, they would have found us. I knew they'd been stuck in Manila during the invasion, or I never would have gotten on that ship. But in my heart, I suspected they weren't waiting for us. The Japanese army had ravaged Guam. Why wouldn't they do the same in the Philippines? My parents had probably been shot or taken to a camp. They were most likely dead. A fool. That's what I was. It took tremendous effort to turn my head. Lifting my arm, I looked at Benny, really looked at him for the first time since he'd come back to the hold to get us after the explosions. His hands and forearms looked even worse than I'd remembered, and I wondered if a shark had gotten hold of him while I was sleeping and I'd missed it. But probably the burns were just getting worse without treatment. His skin was blistered and flaking, and chunks of it were coming off. His fingers had curled up and were digging into the palms of his hands. His face was sunken and cracked. His shirt had torn away, revealing dozens of white puckered scars on his back. I wondered if he'd gotten those in the fighting on Guam. I knew he'd been injured, but he never really liked to talk about that. Poor Benny had been through a lot. Teddy shook in his sleep. He was somewhat burnt, and his lips were split and swollen, a layer of oily sludge covering us all. I guess that's what happens when you spend days floating through the patches of diesel fuel that spread out over the ocean surface like spilled paint. Seeing Teddy and Benny in such rough shape made me wonder what I looked like. I wanted a drink of water so badly. The sound of the lapping waves against the wood drove me nearly mad with thirst. My tongue was swollen, and like Teddy, my lips were cracked and bleeding. The inside of my mouth was completely dry. I tried to wet my lips, but it was like licking steel wool. The temperature rose as the sun lifted higher in the sky. I would have given my right eye for a cloudy, overcast day like the night the ship went down. The sun warmed the water near the surface, so even it provided no relief from the unrelenting heat. With a groan, I pulled myself up to sit. I was staring at the horizon when something bumped against the pallet. Not again. I can't take any more, I thought. But it wasn't a shark. It was a turnip. It floated on the surface of the ocean like a bobber attached to a fishing line. My muscles screamed at me as I leaned over the side and plucked it out of the water. It took considerable effort, but I sat back up so I could inspect it. The turnip was dirty and covered in oily sludge. I tried finding a clean spot on my shirt to wipe it off, but there wasn't one, so I had to settle for the least greasy. It was an honest-to-godness turnip, a vegetable. I hated turnips, but right then it looked like the most delicious, juiciest fruit I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe that we'd finally had a little luck. "Teddy, Benny," my voice was a sorry-sounding croak. "We got food." Neither of them moved. I wiped more grease off the turnip with my fingers and took a bite. It tasted salty and bitter, but I choked it down. I bit off another piece. Whatever moisture was inside the turnip was nearly gone, and my tongue burned, but I swallowed another huge chunk. "Benny, Teddy, wake up. I found a turnip." They didn't stir. They were so exhausted that not even the promise of food could rouse them. I took one more bite, resisting the urge to eat the entire thing. I needed to save some of it for Benny and Teddy. Then my stomach rumbled. I was so hungry, but maybe eating hadn't been a good idea. Suddenly sick, I twisted over the side of the pallet and retched chunks of greasy, salty turnip rising up in my throat and spewing into the water. My stomach cramped and I clutched it with one arm, but the other wouldn't surrender the dirty vegetable back to the ocean. With my stomach empty, I fell back on the pallet. I'm not sure how long I lay there. When I came to, the sun was high in the sky, so it must have been midday. My stomach still hurt and the inside of my mouth stung like heck, but I sat up anyway and scanned the horizon. Far off in the distance, I saw something moving. At first, I thought it was just another shark, but it didn't have the right shape. The more I studied it, the more I was sure that it wasn't a fish or any kind of sea creature, and it was headed in our direction. After about a half hour, it was even closer. I tried shouting hello, but all that came out was a sickly-sounding rasp. I was sure whoever or whatever it was couldn't hear me. The weird noises I was making finally roused Benny, and he looked up at me. "What's up, Pipsqueak?" His voice barely carried over the noise of the waves. "There's something out there, headed this way," I said. "I think it might be men from the ship. Also, I found a turnip, and I tried to wake you both, but you wouldn't get up. I took 2 bites and threw up. I think the salt water ruined it." "No kidding," he said. "That's a lot to happen while a guy is sleeping." He tried to follow my gaze to look off at the approaching object, but couldn't manage to move. "If it's guys from the ship, maybe we can get a poker game going." The joke was funny, but I didn't have the energy to laugh. Another half an hour later, I could finally make out the approaching shape. It was 4 men covered in diesel fuel, and they all looked like they'd seen better days. One of them had been burned on the side of his face, only not as bad as Benny. The others were all sporting various injuries. When they were no more than 50 yards away, I recognized one of them. It was difficult at first with their faces so grimy, but I saw the stripes on his sleeves. It was Sergeant Cabbage, the guy Benny had argued with when he was helping us to stow away, and it looked like he was the only one of the 4 left alive. When they came closer, it was clear that the other 3 men were definitely corpses. Their heads hung limply against their chests. They had lashed themselves together back to back with the extra straps on the life jackets and formed a human raft to keep an eye out for sharks, I guess. Now it was a pretty gruesome vessel. As Cabbage floated along with his 3 dead companions. Like the pallet we were using, the life jackets were waterlogged. They wouldn't keep him afloat much longer. "Who are you?" Cabbage demanded. "Patrick O'Donnell," I said. "What are you doing out here?" "We were on the ship, the Indianapolis." "Who else is that with you?" Something about the way Cabbage was acting made me uneasy. His eyes were wild and they darted everywhere. When he talked, they kind of rolled back in his head. It was strange. "Who you got with you?" I asked. "I asked you a question," he said. He was hoarse, and his words sounded choked off in his mouth. "Just a couple of guys from the ship," I said. I figured it wasn't a good idea for him to know Benny was here. Cabbage already had it in for him, and why was Benny sitting still for this? I looked over at him to find he was unconscious again. That one is shaking. He don't look so good." "No, they're just passed out." "My crew is dead. Why ain't you wearing a uniform?" I didn't know what to say. If by some miracle we were rescued, I still didn't want Benny getting in trouble. Cabbage stared at me, waiting for an answer. I just came off leave and didn't have a chance to change before. I don't have any idea where it came from, but in the next instant he was pointing a pistol at me. I'd learned a lot about weapons from the Chamorro, and I recognized it as a .45 caliber automatic. Most U.S. military personnel carried one. It was a big, powerful handgun, and it looked much bigger and more powerful when it was pointed at you. "Wrong answer," he said. "What? No, I'm not your enemy," I said. "I think you are. I think you and some of your Imperial Navy buddies snuck aboard my ship and blew it up. Probably because you two—" Benny groaned and woke up. "What's going on, Sport?" he asked. His voice was so weak I could barely hear him. "Shh, Benny, we got a little problem," I said. "Who you talking to?" Cabbage demanded, waving the pistol at me. "Is this some kind of trick?" "I'm not talking to anyone, and I'm not your enemy." "That's exactly what a lousy Japanese-loving traitor would say, you lying sneak. Why are you waiting out here? For a sub to come along and pick you up?" "We're not Japanese sailors. We were on the Indianapolis when it blew up, just like you were," I said. "Who was that?" Benny said in his whispery voice. "It's Cabbage," I said. "He thinks we're in the Japanese Navy and we sunk the ship." Benny snorted. "Well, then Admiral Yamamoto has got to command the sorriest Navy in the entire Pacific Theater if they let us in the shape we're in. Stinkevich ain't exactly what you'd call a genius. He's got a gun, I said quietly. He what? Benny wheezed. Who you talking to? Stinkevich demanded. You got a radio trying to call your Japanese Navy buddies? He raised the gun and pointed it at me. I'm not talking to the Japanese Navy, I said, and be careful with that gun. Give me your radio, Stinkevich said. Patty boy, Benny whispered. He's hallucinating. Be careful. I don't have a radio, I said. Liar! I see it right there in your hand. Give it to me, Stinkevich yelled. He was about 10 yards from the pallet now. At this distance, the gun looked like a cannon, and the sergeant had gone crazy enough to fire it. I don't know why he thought I had a radio. I looked down in my right hand. I held the board with the nail through the end, which wouldn't do me any good. He was too far away. In my other hand, I still clutched the turnip. Could he possibly think it was a radio? This isn't a radio. It's a turnip, I said, holding it up. Stinkevich shook his head. You stinking little... You give me that radio. Hand it over now. All right. Take it easy, I said. Toss it over here. Do you hear me? The more he talked, the worse his voice got. I flung the turnip toward him, but I was so weak that it only made it about half the distance to Stinkevich before it flopped into the water. It floated there between the pallet and Stinkevich and the dead men. Slowly his face turned from wild-eyed hysteria to burning anger. You little you did that on purpose. No, I didn't. Don't shoot. You don't understand. I've been out here for days now, fighting off sharks and... Sharks! Where's a shark? Stinkevich said, instantly terrified. His head swiveled around, looking in every direction. This was my chance. Yes, I was weak, but I was also determined. Stinkevich was not going to shoot me. Not when I managed to survive everything else. I concentrated, cocked my arm, and threw my nail stick at Stinkevich like a tomahawk. It twirled through the air, whistling end over end until it thumped into the side of his head. Ow! He shouted in pain. His hands instinctively went up to soothe his temple, and he dropped the gun. It sank into the water before he could do anything to stop it. I only hoped he didn't have another one hidden in the fields of his life raft. You rotten little stinking... I'll kill him! You hear me? I'll kill you! Benny had been floating in and out of consciousness. What just happened? What do you do? He asked me. I gave him a tap on the conch, threw my stick right at his head, I said. Now, I wish I could have seen that, Benny smiled. Whatever you do, don't let him get near us. Stinkevich ain't never been right in the head. I won't, I said. Who are you talking to? Stinkevich demanded. Your spy buddies? I hear you. Don't think I don't. Stinkevich's head bobbed forward, and I thought for a moment he had passed out. Then he lifted his head, shaking it from side to side. Who are you? What are you doing out here? He asked. His tone was different now, confused, like he'd just woken up from a nap. I told you, we were on the ship. What ship? The one that exploded and sank, the USS Indianapolis, I said. What? The Indy didn't explode. It's right down there. He pointed underwater. Sure, it's down there because it sank. Everybody said it got torpedoed, I said. What are you talking about? He said, perplexed. It's right there, right under the water. It's perfectly fine. I'm going to the G-Dunk to get some ice cream. They got good ice cream there. I like chocolate myself. Why haven't I seen you on the ship before? I didn't know what to say. Just moments ago, he'd been a raving maniac. If I said the wrong thing, I could set him off again. You got anything to eat? He asked. I shook my head. His head bobbed forward again, and for several minutes he didn't say anything. I thought for a moment I even heard him snoring. I tried to quietly paddle our raft away from him, but I must have splashed too loudly because he jerked awake. Who are you? Where did you come from? I told you, my name is Pat. You got any food? He interrupted. Benny's eyes fluttered open. He's still here? Yeah, I muttered. I'm going to board your ship and search it, Stinkevich said. I'm a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and I believe you're carrying contraband. Prepare to be boarded. You still got your stick with the nail, Pipsqueak? Benny asked. I looked at him with alarm. I just told him I'd thrown the stick at Stinkevich, and he'd forgotten. Or maybe I hadn't told him. I couldn't remember anymore. The sun dazzled my eyes, and I started to wonder if I was hallucinating. Was Stinkevich really there? Was I dreaming all of this? Why couldn't I wake up and be back in my bunk on Guam? A wave jostled the pallet and brought me back to reality. I wasn't dreaming. Everything that happened was real. Nope, I don't have that stick anymore, I said. I tossed it at him and hit him in the head, made him drop the gun. Benny chuckled. Now, I'd have given a week's pay to see that. But listen, can't let him get too close, or most of all, let him get on the raft. That tub of lard will capsize us for sure. While we were talking, Stinkevich was splashing and paddling in the water, and it cut the distance to the raft in half. He was making a lot of noise with all of his shouting and thrashing around, so much that he hadn't noticed that several yards behind him, a dorsal fin had broken the water surface. It cut through the water like a knife, and it headed straight for him. "I don't think that's going to be a problem, Benny," I said. And that's the end of chapter 14, and we'll be back tomorrow with chapter 15. Everybody stay healthy and safe.